Now that the defense has rested its case without calling a single witness, including Brian Walshe,
has found the man accused of killing his wife on New Year's Day 2023 guilty of first-degree murder.
The latest developments in this case. The trial judge who's been presiding over this case has a question to resolve: whether she needs to recuse herself.
On the morning of January 1st, 2023, in the quiet coastal town of Cohasset, Massachusetts, a family had just rung in the new year. 3 young children were asleep in the house. A holiday dinner had been served the night before. From the outside, it looked like the picture of an ordinary family closing out the holidays. By the time the sun came up, one of the 2 adults in that home would never be seen again. Her name was Ana Walshe. She was 39 years old, a real estate executive, a mother of 3, an immigrant who had built a life from nothing. And in the hours after that New Year's celebration, while her children slept, her husband would begin typing a series of searches into his devices that would horrify an entire nation. This is the story of a marriage built on lies, a betrayal on both sides, and a disappearance that ended without a body, but not without a verdict. To understand what was lost, you first have to understand who Ana Walshe was. Ana was born in Serbia and came to the United States chasing the kind of life that immigrants dream about. She was ambitious, magnetic, and relentless. She rose to become a regional manager for a major real estate firm, a company with offices in Washington, D.C., where her career was thriving. She and her husband, Brian, lived in an expensive home in Cohasset, roughly 40 miles from Boston, and together they were raising 3 young sons. To friends, Ana was warm and full of energy. She worked hard. She traveled between Massachusetts and Washington constantly, splitting her life between her family in Cohasset and her career in the capital. She was, by every account, a woman in motion, building, providing, holding a complicated life together. But underneath that motion, the marriage she was holding together was quietly coming apart. Brian Walshe was not what he appeared to be. To the outside world, he presented himself as an art dealer, a man of taste and connections. But behind that image was a con man. In a separate federal case, Brian Walshe had already pleaded guilty to fraud, specifically to a scheme involving the sale of forged Andy Warhol paintings. He had sold fake art as though it were real, pocketing money from buyers who trusted him. By New Year's Day 2023, that fraud had caught up with him. Brian was awaiting sentencing in the art fraud case, confined largely to the home in Cohasset while his legal fate hung over him. He wore an ankle monitor, though, notably, one without GPS tracking. His freedom was shrinking, his finances were under strain, and his marriage was under a pressure that most people around them never saw. Because while Brian sat at home, tethered and waiting for a prison sentence, Ana's life was expanding and moving in a direction that did not include him. Here is where this case becomes something more than a simple crime. This was a marriage where the betrayal ran in both directions. Prosecutors would later tell a jury that in the year before her death, Ana had begun an affair. The man's name was William Fasto, and Ana had been seeing him in Washington, D.C., where she commuted for work. It was a secret relationship, carried on away from Cohasset, away from the family home, in the separate life she kept in the capital. So the picture by the end of 2022 was this: a husband who had lied and defrauded his way into a criminal conviction, sitting at home awaiting prison, and a wife who had responded to that collapsing marriage by building a life and a love somewhere else. The defense would later insist that despite the affair, Ana remained committed to her family. Prosecutors would argue something far darker, that Brian Walshe knew about the affair, and that knowledge became a motive for murder. There was also money. Ana Walshe was insured. Prosecutors pointed to a life insurance policy reported at around $2.7 million that named Brian as the sole beneficiary. A failing marriage, a looming prison sentence, a betrayal, and a multi-million-dollar payout waiting on the other side of his wife's death. That was the equation the prosecution laid out. On the night of December 31st, 2022, Brian and Ana Walshe had dinner at their home with a family friend. It was New Year's Eve. The children were there. On the surface, nothing was wrong. Ana Walshe was last seen in the early hours of January 1st, 2023. And then she was gone. According to what Brian would later tell investigators, Ana had left that morning. He said she'd taken a rideshare, an Uber or a Lyft, to the airport to fly to Washington, D.C. for a sudden work emergency. It was a clean, simple explanation. A busy executive called away on urgent business. There was only one problem: it wasn't true. Ana Walshe never called for a rideshare that morning. She never boarded a flight. Investigators would later check the travel records, the airline data, the border crossing systems, and find no trace of Ana traveling anywhere on or after January 1st. The last confirmed record of her flying was weeks earlier, in November and early December, on a completely separate trip. The work emergency in Washington did not exist, and Ana Walshe was not missing on a business trip. She had never left Cohasset at all. For 3 days, no one raised an alarm. It was Ana's employer, not her husband, who finally reported her missing on January 4th, 2023, when she failed to show up for work in Washington. That report set off a search, and when investigators began pulling apart the devices connected to Brian Walshe, they found something that would come to define this entire case. A series of internet searches, dozens of them, and the timeline of when they were made is what makes them so chilling. Prosecutors told the jury that beginning on January 1st, the very day Ana was last seen, someone using Brian Walshe's devices began searching for how to make a body disappear. The searches, presented in court, included questions about dismemberment, about the best tools to dismember a body, about how long before a body begins to smell, about how to stop a body from decomposing. They did not stop there. Investigators presented searches asking whether you can be charged with murder without a body, searches about cleaning blood with ammonia, bleach, and hydrogen peroxide, an article about whether it's possible to clean DNA off a knife, searches about disposing of body parts after a murder, and tellingly, searches about inheritance, how long a person has to be missing before they can be declared dead, and how long before someone missing can be inherited from. And then there were the searches from before. Days earlier, in late December, someone had searched for the best state for a man to get divorced, and for divorce lawyers in Washington, D.C. The prosecution's argument was devastating in its simplicity. Here was a man researching divorce, and then, instead of divorce, researching how to dismember and dispose of a human being, and how to profit from her death. The digital trail was damning, but investigators found more than searches. In the days surrounding Ana's disappearance, surveillance footage captured Brian Walshe visiting hardware stores and pharmacies. On January 1st, cameras recorded him shopping, and in the days that followed, prosecutors say he purchased cleaning supplies, a protective Tyvek suit, a hacksaw, and cutting shears. Then came the dumpsters. Investigators recovered trash bags that had been discarded at a dumpster near an apartment complex belonging to Brian's mother in Swampscott, about 40 miles from the family home. Inside and among the recovered items, authorities found materials stained with blood, a hacksaw, cutting tools, a rug from the Walshe living room, and personal items belonging to Ana, including her COVID-19 vaccination card. Inside the Cohasset home itself, investigators reported finding blood in the basement, along with a knife. Piece by piece, the state assembled a portrait of what they said had happened after that New Year's celebration: a killing, a dismemberment, and a methodical effort to erase a human being from existence. But there was one thing investigators never found, the one thing that, in most murder cases, anchors everything: they never found Ana Walshe's body. Bringing a murder case to trial without a body is one of the hardest things a prosecutor can do. There is no cause of death to point to, no remains for a jury to see. The defense needs only to plant a seed of doubt. The trial opened in Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham, Massachusetts, in December 2025, nearly 3 years after Ana vanished. In a significant move just before jury selection, Brian Walshe pleaded guilty to 2 of the 3 charges against him: misleading a police investigation and the improper conveyance, the disposal, of a human body. In other words, he admitted he had lied to police, and he admitted he had gotten rid of Ana's body. But he refused to admit the one thing that mattered most. He pleaded not guilty to murder. His defense was as bold as it was disturbing. Brian Walshe's attorneys told the jury that Ana had died a sudden, unexplained death, that Brian had woken on New Year's Day to find his wife inexplicably dead in their bed, and that, panicking, a man already facing prison, certain no one would believe him, he had made the catastrophic decision to dispose of her body rather than call for help. The gruesome searches, the defense argued, were the actions of a terrified man dealing with a corpse, not a murderer covering his tracks. The prosecution called around 50 witnesses over 8 days. Among them was William Fastow, the man Ana had been having an affair with, who took the stand and spoke about the secret relationship. Ana's friends testified about the final days of her life. Brian Walshe's defense, by contrast, rested without calling a single witness. Brian himself, who at one point appeared poised to testify, ultimately chose not to take the stand. The prosecutors later said they had a long list of questions ready had he done so. On December 15, 2025, after deliberating for roughly 6 hours across 2 days, the jury returned. Guilty, first-degree murder. In Massachusetts, that verdict carries only one possible sentence: life in prison with no possibility of parole. Brian Walshe showed no visible reaction as the word guilty was read. He was handcuffed, shackled, and led out of the courtroom in silence, the same silence he had kept throughout the trial. Days later, at his sentencing, the judge did not hold back. She described what Brian Walshe had done as barbaric and incomprehensible. Ana's sister, Alexandra, addressed the court, speaking of an unbearable emptiness and of the deepest wound of all, that Ana's 3 children would now grow up without their mother's hand to hold. Outside, prosecutors relayed a message from Ana's sister, 4 simple words that carried the weight of 3 years of waiting. Justice has been served. And yet even now, this case is not entirely closed. Because Brian Walshe never spoke, he never took the stand, he never offered a real explanation. He admitted to disposing of his wife's body, but to this day, he has never told anyone what truly happened inside that house on New Year's Day, or where the rest of Ana Walshe now rests. Her body has never been recovered. 3 children have grown older without their mother, and the only living person who knows exactly what happened in those final hours has chosen, so far, to take that truth with him into a prison cell he will never leave. Ana Walshe was 39 years old. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a woman who built an entire life out of nothing. She deserved to see her children grow up. Instead, she became the center of one of the most chilling murder cases in recent memory. A woman erased by the one person who had promised to love her. Some questions, it seems, are never fully answered. But a jury of 12 people, looking at everything that was left behind, reached the answer that mattered most.